Hey everybody, welcome back. So today on the AI Unleashed podcast, we have the pleasure of being joined by Laurie Niles-Hoffman, who is the leader of 8Levers, which has been operating in the education space for quite a long time. And I won't butcher the introduction. I'll let Laurie introduce herself, but we're going to be talking about the impact of AI on the learning industry fairly broadly. Laurie, welcome.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here. You did not butcher the introduction at all. That's basically what I do. I work with tech leaders and vendors on the future of upskilling and helping them maximize their ecosystems. And I'm a little bit feral and I run around without a leash.
Edit that out. Right, so let's start the discussion, Laurie, by thinking about we have this disruption. This disruption from AI has lasted so far about 3 years. We're in year three of ChatGPT being unleashed, and then the entire world chasing large language models and content creation and things like that. And from a learning industry point of view, I haven't really seen that much difference in the traditional paradigm of learning, which is people develop content because they were asked to, and they develop that. They put it on a platform which posts that content. People access it, and we don't really get anything useful in terms of data out of it. That's still prevalent.
Tell me how you really feel.
If you're watching, I never really had a filter anyway, right? So we're still there, and I was at Learning Tech, last year, this year, and I did a couple of little selfie videos around the wrap up, and we're still kind of in that space. And we could talk about impact, but I want to talk about impact in a tangible way because we have the potential for disruption, but we're not really seeing it realized. So let's first of all talk about what you think the impact is going to be of the AI revolution on the learning industry.
Big, meaty question. So where do I think what I would say what I want it to be. What I want it to be is hyper personalized, targeted learning for each individual that actually is not designed, but is proven for efficacy, meaning that whatever mechanism you're using to build it, the learning for an individual, machine learns in terms of how it actually produces impact, and it feeds that back to you. So it's a continuous virtuous cycle of improvement. That's very lofty, okay? And right now we're just in a lot of content dump because we can, and we're making videos and things that make us look like superheroes in boxes and all that sort of stuff. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think it's the playing. But I also think, too, there's going to be things about how learning is done in the digital age of AI that we can't even foresee right now, because I'm a big believer in data. And I think we make a lot of assumptions or we have theories on how people learn. And those are good to get us up until now. But I think when we start analyzing digital behaviors at a macro scale, which we will have the ability to do, I think we're going to find a lot of those we need to burn down. And we're going to find out a lot of exciting things about how people actually do behave and learn in a digital environment. That I can't predict what it'll be, although I do have a assumption that we would no longer need to have learning objectives at the beginning of every module. That's not really going to necessarily contribute to efficacy anywhere.
I mean, the learning objective thing is an interesting one because learning objectives are an artifact of an archaic process. And when we think about the things that you've just said, where we have, we're doing a lot of content design, we might want to personalize or hyper personalize that stuff. I kind of go down two routes there. And the first route is content at rest, static content probably is no longer needed if we get the machinery right. But the other side is personalization cannot occur unless we can collect personal data. We don't know about the person, so we can't really target things. Are you seeing much movement in either of these spaces, either dynamic content or personalization through data?
Okay. So interesting that you say that. So the static content, I think what is going to be the biggest barrier, and I am seeing some movement, so I'll pause there, but what I think is going to be, first of all, one of the barriers is regulatory content, because that's where a lot of that comes from, where regulators have said, for example, if you do any NASBA or CPE content or anything, it has to be written in a certain way. Until they actually unstick themselves, that's going to be a thing that remains, which is frustrating. But in terms of also to static content, I think a lot of where I'm not seeing a ton of movement is the fact that people have invested a lot in content libraries, and those are static. And the other thing too is that we haven't educated our stakeholders to understand that static content. They're comfortable with it because it's a paradigm they're used to, and they think if everybody does the same thing, everybody learns the same thing, and we all have the same outcomes, which is a complete fallacy, and it doesn't work. So that's history that probably everybody knows, and that's the context that we're in right now. What I get very excited about are technologies that are layering I'm going to use coach instead of agent, because I think that people have been using them interchangeably, and they can mean different things in different contexts. But layering an AI coach on top of their content, as well as whatever data they have inside within an organization. So say their knowledge management, and then to your point, whatever personal data they know about that person. So they will know their role, they know who they report into, or they know their history. They know their CV, they know, what projects they're working on, all that to bring it in so that that coach can now meld the best of their learning content, the methodologies that are embedded within that. So, say if it's something like how they want them to perform in a sales conversation, or how they want them to handle, giving feedback. Those are very generic ones, but pulling those together and then actually adding real context from the company and real context from that person as it learns more about that person. I am seeing technologies do that. However, putting a line under that, where I get a little worried is how to get really to personalization, how much data is needed to be fed, and are employees really aware of how much is potentially being mined about them to feed into this? So if you look at the Microsoft skills inference tools, the skills intelligence tools embedded within Viva, I mean, that in theory is looking at, I'll give a very simple example. It's looking at how you use Excel, and it says, Lori, you can't do a pivot table to save your life. I'm going to feed some, content to you, perhaps analyzing my tone on emails or in Slack to then give me feedback. That some of that crosses a line to me, and the argument will be from companies that, well, we own those interactions, but is there a point where am I able to turn those on and off? And if I turn some of them off, does it then even limit my career progression because I'm not going to get the exact learning I need, or my learning won't be fed into, say, some talent intelligent tool because I have turned that off? These are all questions I think that need to be addressed and answered.
I think that's really interesting, because the holy grail, and I don't believe in the terminology of skills. I think it's
True.
basically garbage data that the industry is focused on.
Yeah.
And most skills engines tend to be declarative in terms of data. So they say to somebody, how good are you communication? I'm an 8. Amazing. Recommend me something generic from a content library that's got nothing to do with my job, and maybe I'll look at it and maybe I'll score myself a 9 afterwards, right? It's just, it's chasing the tail of something that doesn't really exist.
Correct.
And that's a difficult thing. Now, if you go the other way and you say, well, whether we're talking about Microsoft skills inference or whether we're talking about observations through a computer vision and CCTV of the more manual side of work, so making coffee at a coffee shop or digging a hole on a railway track or whatever it happens to be, and we're able to see if somebody can do a thing. That kind of data is very valuable, and it doesn't really relate to skills, because it relates to activities. And relating to activity and doing it correctly, these kinds of interventions, I doubt very much whether they are in the jurisdiction of a learning department. These seem to be operational activities to me. So it takes us down a very different path, and we start to think about, well, we have a learning department, and mostly we don't. Let's face it, if you're calling yourself a learning department in your compliance department, you're a training department, not a learning department.
Is that praying with PRAY or PREY?
Well, yeah, it's these are tricky nomenclature-based debates, because skills versus capabilities versus activities versus tasks, learning versus training, growth versus compliance. These are words, right? And I think,
yeah, and I completely agree with the whole skills debate. Basically, where a lot of this came from was we want to have an ability to compare people between organizations, to compare people between jobs, and to measure them. And that was the thinking. And if you really want to go down a rabbit hole on, companies that are doing this, I mean, the ultimate goal is, to have a standard, maybe even a global standard, that these are the 1,000 skills that, you could possibly have, and we rank everybody against them. And then as you move through your career and through companies and through wherever you are, that becomes a portable blockchain of data that goes with you. There's a huge amount of problem with that. When people went into the taxonomy or tasks taxonomy, I can't even say that quickly. The thing is that tasks don't translate between companies, so that doesn't necessarily work, or they do, but they're difficult to translate. So you're one about making coffee. Well, if I'm making coffee at a Starbucks versus whether I'm making coffee at a Costa Coffee, is probably a good example. They're going to be different tasks. But then some things might be universal customer service, although will it be? Because I'm sure that each company has their own way of greeting people and, asking, would you like fries with that? So all this is it gets really murky and muddy. But I think some of that you can just throw away, because maybe I don't think there's a global good in ranking everybody against all of this and saying you're an 8 or a 10 or a 2 and against all of these things. It only benefits companies and not necessarily the individual, and it's very arbitrary. So to me, what you were talking about is looking at the performance data. That is where I get really excited, and I call that closed loop reporting, where it's like, can I now look at learning and what actually makes a difference, what doesn't make a difference, and reverse engineer that learning process down. Now, some of those things won't be learning driven. Some of those things will have nothing to do with learning. I mean, if you're in a factory and you're driving a forklift, 10, kilometers per hour, and you're only supposed to be 5, I have no idea what the speed would be. It may be because, you're on a timeline and this is the speed that you have to in order to get your bonus, because that's how fast you have to operate. So there's a lot of other things. But I think closing that loop, that's where L&D, kept saying we want ROI and want to measure impact, but they get very hesitant when you start actually plugging into those systems. And that's where I really think you get to that output that you're talking about. And we can call that capability, task, thing. I really don't care, but it's what it is.
So let's drill into that just a little bit, right? Performance consulting. It's a thing. It's a term that we've used in the industry for, I don't know, 2, 3 years, 5 years, whatever. And there's a gap. Now, the gap that I see, I've worked in many big companies. Either they were clients of mine or I've worked there as an employee. And so we have learning or training departments. They say, well, we're going to opt for a business partner model. So the guy or girl who used to be the person who used to make storyline courses, now they're going to go and have coffee with people around the business, and they're going to be told what to do. And they'll just basically a glorified intake form. And somebody somewhere mentions performance consulting, and they go, you know what? Now I'm a business partner, I'm going to do performance consulting. And they go and still get told to go and make e-learning, and they go off and make e-learning, and nothing's changed, but they've got some fancier titles. And there's a kind of dilution of what this stuff means. And I'll give an example of I was at a conference in somewhere in the world, can't remember where, and I had a co-speaker, and that co-speaker was saying pretty much what you've just said, that there's this holy grail that the industry has been chasing, and that is, how do you calculate return on investment? And I wrote an article about this, which will be published at some time around the recording of this. So by the time this comes out, everybody go and read it. And that is that this stuff isn't difficult. This stuff is, every department in the world is able to do this. Marketing, sales, safety, security, it doesn't matter who they are. They're able to demonstrate, we've done this thing, and there's this tangible effect on the business. We've got fewer accidents. Every accident costs this amount of money, and we can demonstrate that. We've gone out and we've stimulated purchasing behavior, and we know how much of that we've done. We've had this many conversations with clients, and this is the conversion rate, and every conversion has got a monetary value attached.
Agreed.
Difficult?
Okay. It's not difficult. Okay. That part is not difficult. I will have some sympathy, though, for the average L&D team and look at the average L&D professional in the sense that we put a lot on them. Okay. They're expected to know, a rapid authoring tool, whatever that is. They're expected to know, how now not to just do SCORM, but, some JSON so they can do, XAPI. They're expected to have performance consulting conversations, all this sort of stuff. They do not have often the capacity for the data analytics part. So I'm going to give them a pass on that because I've seen how tight, and oh, you're shaking your head. I've seen
Yeah.
how tight that they get. Now, I also would say, though, effective leadership can look at it and say there are things that we should be putting down and not doing. So one of the things that I was doing with my teams is we actually operated like an A&E. We actually had a triage system. And there's a lot of stuff that we just said no to, that we didn't need, and we started to become a lot more streamlined. So that helps cut down on some of the noise. I think the other thing, in all honesty, that I see happening is that L&D teams love, or the company loves, to have the annual plan. And I'm not excusing, I'm saying this is a rationale that I see. And the annual plan is, okay, we're going to produce 75, e-learning modules, this many hours of learning. We all agree to it. We get the money. That's how the business partner works. They have their, big moment one day a year, or maybe once a quarter, where they take in the orders, and this is what we're going to produce, and then the budget is allocated, and that just simply, to me, does not work. And they're also, to the other problem I would say with L&D, is they're not using data at the onset of things. They simply, to your point, say yes to things because it's not a numbers game. It's really an ego game, and everybody thinks that they know learning because they've gone to school. So, I mean, I would have an SVP that would say this is going to be a priority over X. And I would have to push back and say, how does this help the business make money, save money, or mitigate risk, and have that conversation back to them. So there's a variety of factors. However, what I am getting a ton of hope out of is I do see systems that are now plugging into that data in an automated way where you can start to see where that's pulling from. So if you think of old marketing automation tools to send out, emails and run campaigns, et cetera, they didn't plug into the customer relationship management system. So at first, so you're kind of operating like, I didn't know who was, what was actually happening, and I would have to sort of try and triangulate the two. Then we plugged it into a Salesforce, and bada bing, bada boom, we've now got this whole thing where we can actually look at each individual, and we can look at each individual campaign and email, and what the open rate does, and how that does conversion, and what does that lead to. And it made it very easy so that, marketing professionals didn't really have to learn any of that data. Now, this happened, I'm going to say 12 or 14 years ago, and L&D never caught up. And now I'm starting to see that the learning systems, in some instances, are now making the leap to plug into some of these things. So they're looking at things like Jira, or they're looking at things like the CRM. They're looking at that to plug into that data. I think that's the only way that we are going to be able to actually make that part of our DNA and how we operate. That said, there's going to be a lot of uncomfortable truths, because I've played with this, where we start to realize, oh, we spent X amount of money and nothing actually happened. And that, I think, is again, comes back to my point where we're going to have to let go of some of these things that we hold dear, that we think are the paradigm of excellence in learning, that really aren't actually contributing to the bottom line. All right, go for it. They hit the timer and it's like, go.
I've got a number of comments on that. I have no sympathy for folks who cannot do this. I have sympathy for learning people because they need to go and make assets, and they need to develop things, and need to learn how to use an authoring tool and an LMS, socials. Salespeople need to learn how to use their CRM. They need to generate sales brochures. They need to generate quotes. These things. Every profession has to do a bunch of things. Say it again.
Those people are compensated on that, and that becomes part of their deliverables. Not always true in L&D.
So learning leaders, if you're watching and you're crying because I've said some mean things, then how much are you compensated on the facts of being able to demonstrate value that comes from your department? And how much are you compensated on the fact that you are able to demonstrate that the money went into your department was somehow used? They're two very different things.
Correct.
And how do you drive those KPIs with your leaders? Now, most leaders most leaders of businesses won't say to a learning leader, demonstrate the value of what you've done. Most of them will say, well, make some KPIs and we'll measure you against those.
Exactly.
So it's driven in the wrong way. Now, Laurie, you and I run businesses. We understand there are marketing systems, there are sales systems, there are automations, there are people who have different functions in a business. There's a value chain of a business. Things that you do for revenue, you deliver value to clients, etc., all of this stuff. How have we got, in any way, shape, or form, a function that exists across multiple verticals that doesn't get this? How has that happened?
How does it happen? Well, it's again, it's a number of factors. It's one. I think there's a lot of business leaders who don't understand what they could get out of their learning department, and I think that comes back to a fallacy that I see time and time and again, where because everybody's gone through some bit of schooling, they've been exposed to school through, going to elementary school or going to higher education, or they've taken a course. All that it leads to a false fallacy or a fallacy that they know how good learning is, and they think that because I feel good at the end of it, it was good and it has impact. So I think that's one of the big things. And I know that sounds very trite, but there's no way that like a CFO would have a look at the CTO and say, you know what, I think if we vibe coded that, it would work. Like it just wouldn't happen. It happens all the time and all the time in L&D. So I think there's that. I think we all got very confused. Business leaders got confused. And I'm not using L&D business leaders, but business leaders got confused between the difference of compliance learning and learning with a lowercase l, because they bought their learning management system because they needed to report things back to operate as a business. And that was a very tangible. People don't do, if people do something wrong for anti-money laundering, I'm going to get fined £2 million. This is the equation. It made sense. A plus B equals C. And you did it. Now, again, we can say that doesn't really work, but that's where they sit. Then when you start getting into some of the softer skills and what they want people to do as an organization, those are harder to quantify, right? But we also never really tried, to be honest. And so we did what we did. We did really fuzzy data. And then I think business leaders looked at that and say, that's good enough. And so we've stuck into this. But the problem that I've always had when I worked within organizations, and like you, I was in, Big Four and some highly regulated organizations, I didn't do well, where I would start poking at things and saying, okay, can we actually start tracking this together? And that was a big, don't do that. We don't want to go that far, because it erodes perhaps our budget. It erodes the confidence that the business is going to have in us. And nobody wants to disturb that. But it has to be disturbed. Like we've been talking about this for decades. How many studies have there been? The great training robbery went out by Harvard Business Review how many years ago? And it was passed around and everyone went, yeah, that's true. And then nobody ever talked about it again. So I think there's complacency, there's fear. And I think we've in some ways tricked the business to say this actually isn't measurable. And the fact is, it is.
I mean, honestly, my opinion is that people who are doing business and they're making money and they've got operations and they've got sales and all this stuff, basically just ignore the learning department unless you say something around compliance, which is what you said, which isn't a return on investment discussion. That's a license to operate discussion. Very different.
Right, you have to do it. Mm-hmm.
And I think most of them just go, fine, we'll let these guys deal with their compliance. If they complain enough, we may give them some budget for a system. Otherwise, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. And I had this, what are we on now? July, August. We're around the middle of the year. This year, I have had 4 separate conversations with prospects where I've had somebody from ops or sales and the learning person on a call with me. And they've asked me, and it's nearly always the same thing, right? We have salespeople who deal with clients. Salespeople who deal with clients, either they're not pitching the products correctly, or they're not rehearsed enough in marrying the solution that we have, the service that we have, to the problem of the client, or they're not reaching conversion, or they're not getting enough calls with the client. All of those are very specific things.
Yep, and they're all specific
they
data
require,
points.
Say it again?
They're all specific data points too.
Yeah, they require specific intervention against specific data points. So this call is being recorded for training and monitoring purposes. Of course it is. Let's use that data because it's there for training and monitoring. Use that data, figure out what isn't being said, and target the interventions against those things. In all 4 of these conversations, the learning person who's been on the call has been saying, and we're going to bring in a content library of avatar-based role play, which will teach generic communication stuff. And I have no filter, so I'm not good at being faced with a useless person on a call and not calling that out. And my reflection on this is, there is a huge disconnect, even when they're on the same call and they're pulling in the same direction, they've got the same problem statements. there's a disconnect between this idea of solving a tangible and measurable problem
Mhm.
and going and buying a shiny thing from the market.
Mhm.
And learning folks nearly always want to do the second thing because the
Completely.
first one apparently is too difficult. Now, for me, that seems like a very easy problem to solve. It's a measurable and tangible thing. We can take an intervention and we can measure before and afterwards. But I'm not seeing that kind of thinking in the market, and I'm not seeing that kind of thinking from what we would say are performance consultants, because they used to be instructional designers. They used to do graphic design. They used to
Mhm.
make pretty pictures, and someone said, "Go and be a performance consultant." And I'm not faulting that. Go and do it. But there are skills and activities and things that you need to know if you're going to go and do that you can't just translate from instructional design. What do we need to do in that space to make sure that these folks remain employable as we
Mhm.
go through this AI revolution?
Well, I'm going to throw an honest thought in there. We automate the performance consulting. It doesn't become a human driven task. We look at multiple data fields to actually point out what are the learning needs in the organization before they even are raised to a business partner to talk to the L&D department. And that can be done in a number of ways, but you can set for somebody in a particular role saying these are the 8, I'm going to say things. Let's forget about skills, and we've had that discussion: skills, capabilities, whatever. Okay. Um, these are the things, or the 8 things this person needs to do. Plus, we know in the future here are the 3 other things that they're going to need to do, and that becomes data that essentially does the performance consulting for us to say, okay, and this is what this person needs to do. This is where they're competent. This is where they aren't, and builds that personalized path. I actually think it's not far from now where performance consulting will no longer be it'll be a human in the loop, perhaps, but it's not going to be a human led task because the cycle takes too long. Now, I know there's people who are going to freak out about that. I also think we haven't done a really good job of it for like 20 years. So let's let the robots try, or let's engineer it in a smart way where we can get closer to better. That would be my take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how automated your business is. For me, I've gone completely AI first because I have a new-ish business, about 3 years old.
Yep, yep,
So I do have agentic workflows, automations, and all
yep,
of this stuff,
totally.
basically fulfilling most of the roles in my business because I can.
Yep,
And if I can do sales discovery and qualification of prospects, then
correct.
that's not that different from doing discovery with a stakeholder, operational stakeholder, wants media created. But also on the flip side, media creation is now fully democratized. So anybody in ops or any part of any business can just pick up some tools and make stuff themselves. So
Correct.
this leads me to basically a cycle where we probably don't need certain parts of what we say are the learning industry. And back to the start of this, when I was saying content goes onto a platform, produces
Yeah,
some poor
it,
quality
it's
data,
not going to.
we don't need it. And if we
Mm.
don't need it, then what's the implication? Because the implication is that we have potentially what used to be a multi-billion-dollar industry of LMSs, authoring tools, agencies that go and make e-learning for clients and charge through the nose for it. 50K here and there for a Rise course. We've all heard that before, right?
Yeah,
You could do it yourself for nothing if that's what you want to do, but not nothing, of course, license costs, etc.
yeah, exactly.
But you have all of this entire machinery that's been built around the concept of we can prove that somebody received a glorified PDF at a particular timestamp. That all goes away, right? So what are we going to do?
Well, it's interesting. So I made a post, I guess it was last week, and I don't want to product push, but and it's not a company I have any stake in, but they have found a way that their AI tool can scrape SCORM content, so it can actually break into the SCORM files and pull out that content and release it. I got very excited about this. I actually got, this is hilarious. I actually got an anonymous email. I think they sent it from like Gorilla Mail or something like that. Like it was an email that you can't reply to, basically saying that this is Scorum is a tool that, folks like Adobe and Articulate are never going to allow to go away, and that I should stop poking at this. I thought this was really funny because, like, if I ever go missing, like, apparently the Scorum cartel, will
That's
take
been
me out.
right.
Exactly, and I'll be like, drown in a river somewhere with like an anvil that says "click next to continue" tied around my feet. But anyway, um, this did make me laugh. But, yes, there's a whole industry that is going to change, but we are not the only ones. And I think we're precious if we start to say, oh, well, poor us. And this is what's happening to us. Have you looked around the rest of the world and how things are changing? And I also do believe that there is still going to be a need for really qualified learning professionals who can work with the machine and and be human in it. I know you and I, we've talked about, like, automation, and maybe we don't need L&D. I think that's if we do the same process that we always did before. I think we can make L&D actually infinitely better if we strip out those things and we look at a new process for how we operate as a unit, and then rethink, what does learning actually mean from a business standpoint, and what does it mean from a user standpoint. So there's that whole other discussion. But yeah, it goes away. It does go away. Parts of what I do will go away. Parts of what everybody does will go away. I'm sorry. But this is also, I think, the way that we move forward. This has been holding us back for a really long time. And I also look at it on the other side. And this is where it gets a bit, I'll say, meta, because I'm not pronouncing the H properly, but we'll go. I'm trying to get that in there. There's a whole population, it's the world that has to learn AI. And we are throttling that by holding on to the ways that we want to do things. We are not making it better for them to keep up with the industry, and we're not helping them stay relevant, or they're going to be made redundant. And that, to me, is where it starts really having implications. So if you want to cling to those things, you have to understand there's a person on the other side who's just trying to stay afloat. And you're basically saying, yeah, I don't feel like it. I don't feel like doing something better. And that, to me, is a problem.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have I have built a platform which has AI literacy, data literacy, AI readiness, all of this stuff. And one of the courses on there is, some of these aren't the courses, they're programs to organizational development rather than individual development programs. But one of them is AI for learning professionals, and I have that, and it's a good course. Go and check it out if you wanna go and sit through that course. There was part of me when I was developing it, and I was thinking, I'm addressing a market need, and there are people who need to know stuff about this, and that's great. The other part of me was thinking, it seems kind of weird that I'm developing something for the whole organization on AI literacy, and at the same time, I'm developing something for the learning department so they can go and teach the rest of the organization about AI literacy. And how was this? You know what I mean? There's some kind of disconnect in that.
Completely. And there's a bigger disconnect too. And I don't know if you've looked at any of the AWS, Google, or the Microsoft learnings teaching people in general about AI literacy and all that. The uncomfortable truth is none of them used AI in it. There's no, you don't actually interact with the tool to do any of that. So prompt engineering is just, click next to continue, but you don't actually go to whatever tool, enter in a prompt, and then it comes back to you and says, this is why this is a good prompt, or this is why this isn't. You haven't used this particular formula, or that sort of thing, because we don't have the comfort with the tools yet either. So there's a whole bunch of things that are happening. I think also too, when it comes down to learning professionals, learning AI and becoming comfortable with it, there's something scary about, we're held responsible and have the keys to teach people who need to do this when we don't know it ourselves necessarily, and we haven't done it ourselves. And that like, when you start going into, like, agentic AI and all of that, I start to wonder, will there be a future even when L&D professionals are tasked not with just upskilling humans, but the bots? Like, are we going to be, training bots and writing the SOPs and checking them and doing all that? Now that's going into a totally, different direction. But there's a lot to unpick there, and there's a lot that we're just not doing right and getting to.
I think so the future of all of this for me is either workflow automation process, agentic and assistant capability, or data retrieval and curation and things like that. And those are probably the big areas where people will have jobs in the future. I don't hadn't thought of a viable route for people who their entire skill set is to do media design,
Mhm.
how they get to the point where they're going to be doing one of these three roles. For me, that jump is so big that you'd have to be very self motivated to do that. And saying spoon feed me, tell me what tools to go and use, and give me a course so I can do it. It'll help, but it's not going to get you all the way there. There's going to have to be some kind of individual level drive, motivation, eye of the tiger, some kind of hunger to
Uh-huh.
to survive in what's going to be a competitive environment. And I don't know if an industry that has grown up from folks that used to be a lawyer, came to the end of their useful life as a lawyer, played golf with the CEO. The CEO said, "Go run the training department," and they've just done that ever since. I don't know if that kind of role is necessarily going to make the leap easily. So there's going to be cognitive and emotional work to get over this, I think.
I completely agree. And I don't mean to be glib when I say like everybody's changing. I know it's hard. I'm in the same position. I mean, I'm a sole proprietor of my business, and like I have to change in order to keep up. It's there. I do agree it's a huge leap, and not everyone maybe is even too going to be in L&D, right? And they may move to other areas, because I do believe you have to have satisfaction in work. And some of the direction that things are changing in may not be for everybody. And you may need to look at where you're actually going to find that sense of purpose. That said, one thing we haven't talked about is I actually never believe that classroom or face-to-face training is ever going to go away. I don't think organizations are ever going to just shut that completely down, because it has benefits in ways that I don't think we fully are articulating in this conversation. So I do see that as an L&D function still remaining. So there's also still space in that. I think there's still tons of work to be done to get that really, really, really tight and really done well. So not everything is going to be digitized. That I don't see going away. I think actually a company who decides to just get rid of that runs a real disservice to their people. Now we can debate whether those face to face are actually parties or are they actual learning interventions, but there's all of the things around it that still need to happen. We are human after all. But yeah, it's going to be a huge leap. Now, to your point about being driven and deciding to do that, I think there's also too a lot of power and challenge in saying this isn't for me, and I'm going to look at something else, and to pivot. There's a lot of strength in that, in doing that too.
I think you're raising a couple of things in my mind. And one of the things is that because of the AI revolution, we have an increased scrutiny on demonstrating return. But
Mm-hmm.
also because of the AI revolution, we have an increased expectation of quality. And
Correct.
there are, of course, facilitated sessions. You go and you sit in a hotel room, and the sandwiches are nice, and you get brought coffee twice a day, and
Yeah.
everybody's happy. You go for drinks afterwards, you do some networking, and it's, yeah, everyone's happy. But I think there's going to be an expectation of the quality outcomes of those sessions that is different to how we currently deal with it. Because how we currently deal with it is, did you like the sandwiches? Yes, everybody's happy. Whereas in future, there's probably going to be a little bit more emphasis on what are the outcomes? What did you learn? What are you going to do differently as a result of this? And because generally our expectations of learning across the board should go up if everybody has access to a coach in their pocket, right?
Right.
Do you think that's
Right.
an insurmountable leap for many sort of facilitators?
I don't. I don't. I don't. I think that I think it's something that, for those who are really passionate about facilitation would actually embrace. I mean, they this is what they do, right? So I don't think that's insurmountable at all. I also, yes, we can be facetious and say, the sandwiches were nice and the hotel was nice and all of those sorts of things. But there is something about that whole collective experience that I do think organizations, especially when they're thinking of talent pipeline, talent attraction, and all of that, are going to be mainstays. We can debate whether they're effective or not. But they're going to be there. Now, do I love face-to-face training? Do I love being in all of that? No, I can't stand it. I don't want to socialize. I'm an introvert. I don't want to do any of those things. But I've also, as an outsider looking in, I can also appreciate that there are aspects to it that people genuinely require.
I mean, I am. probably an extrovert. I do like socializing, and I think there is value in social learning. That is definitely a thing.
Mhm.
But I think formalizing social learning versus saying there is value in social learning, I think those are very
Yeah.
different things. People who are on the job, they're in teams, they're doing things together, they're learning from each other. There's lots of experiential learning mixed with social learning. That is an unparalleled learning experience. So
Yes.
there is value, but how do we structure that in a way that there is still a learning department and this isn't just an operations function?
Well, I think that again, it still comes down to the data piece. Just because you're in a classroom doesn't mean that we're not going to be relying on data. It comes down to, okay, we'll actually have much better performance consulting. So when we get people in the room, we know what the issues actually are. We know the things that we need to teach, and we will actually be looking at, and there's ways that we can incorporate digital into the classroom too, where we're going to start seeing the incremental learning and the practice. So I think it's really just putting a different mindset, and what we're already doing. Now, will the ratio change, or will we see less classroom training? Of course, it's a cost. We've been through all of this, but I think it's designing it better. Yes, that will stay.
So there's therefore an imperative on design to kind of make that work, right?
Yeah.
Um, so we're coming up to a point where I'm going to ask probably my tricky question, which I always ask everybody, and that is the future of learning. We think of artificial intelligence and all the tech that we have available to us, the swinging budget and headcount cuts that are coming across nearly every sector, and the future of learning, the learning industry. Is it utopian or dystopian? What do you think?
Oh, okay. Can I say dystopian, utopian? And this is, bear with me. I actually think when we really think about what learning will be, it won't be something you get from an organization. It'll be something both personal and professional. I think it'll be something that starts when you're very, very young, that there's actually a digital coach or teacher or mentor, whatever it is, that follows you throughout your life. So that part is dystopian. Okay. Because the idea of being a child interacting with something that's not a person that's teaching you. But I do think there will be that element. And I think it's going to be a coach or a person, hypothetically, AI person, that is following you through all your transitions in life and seeing where you go and what you've learned and where you've struggled, what your life has been like, and encompassing all of that to become that ultimate mentor to you. I think there's ultimately going to be a battle between what you have personally and then what organizations will want to tap into that personal. And I think that people are going to start separating the two very, very much so. And so that the data that organizations have is always going to be subpar because it will not tap into that actual person to do that personalization that we were talking about before. So I think that's where organizations will always struggle, except for the individuals who maybe will say, yes, you can have access to all of this and give me that continue that growth that I'm already doing on my personal trajectory, that maybe by the time I enter the workforce, I'm 18, 21, however many years old, and I've already have all of that canon behind me, and embedded within me. um, yeah, that's where I see the ultimate. But there's going to be that push pull between what is my personal and what is professional, and the lines are increasingly blurring. Right. Completely concur. Completely concur. It'll be very, very different. We know that. I mean, that's a trite statement to just, make in and of itself. It will be reduced. It will be reduced. We will combine with knowledge management, for example. One of them will win out in organizations. Why, as a CEO, would I have both? So those things, again, I can't help but think of that learner on the other end and say, if it's better for them, um, and it's better, there's better opportunities there, then I think we need to burn it down. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been an honor. I always learn so much when I listen to you and your thoughts and perspectives. So thank you.